Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Took Hinata for Himself, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. That night they all sat down to dinner. Naruto seated himself near River, but, seeing this, Hinata moved to the other end of the table and sat nearer to her father. Naruto couldn't pretend this didn't irritate him, and he spent the next hour shooting furtive looks down the room, where Hinata was speaking with Lee. "Honey, eat something." It was River, speaking low so that no one else could hear. "You're going to burn a hole in her head if you keep staring." Naruto looked down and was surprised to see a full plate of food sitting before him. He had never neglected food in his life. Quickly, he wolfed it down, not really noticing the flavor, then went back to his vigil. Hinata was being interrogated by her father now. She was nodding or shaking her head once every few seconds while Neji kept a close watch on her downcast face. He looked worried. Naruto watched until he heard someone say his name. It was Tenten. She smiled as he jumped and looked at her. "You were miles away." "Not really," said Naruto, "I think I was just a few meters." A few minutes later Hiashi stood. River paused in her talk with Hanabi and directed everyone's attention. "As some of you will know, Hinata will soon come of age." Naruto looked up. When was her birthday? To mark the occasion, Hiashi continued, "There will be a celebration here." They all looked interested. "You are security?" He added as an afterthought. "Oh well," sighed Tenten, "we should have seen that one coming." Hiashi nodded to them all and walked briskly away. Tenten excused herself, followed by Neji. Seeing her distraction slipping away, Hinata jumped up and ran out. Naruto opened his mouth to call after her but knew that the sizable number of witnesses would make that hard to explain. He waited until Ino and Sakura retired and then went to bed himself. He was sharing with Kiba and Shino, but even though they arrived long after he did, it took him much longer to get to sleep. He stared at the ceiling until nearly 3 o'clock, unaware that in another part of the house a girl with a birthday fast approaching was doing the same thing. "Neji." A quiet voice came from the door. Neji sat bolt upright. Tenten was stood in her pajamas by the door. He leapt from his bed and yanked her into the room. He checked the hallway before shutting the door and rounding on her. "Are you crazy? What if someone had seen you?" "By someone, do you mean your uncle?" Neji's mouth closed in a tight line. "Don't worry," she said bitterly, "I wasn't going to ask you about that anyway." 10. "I have something I think you need to know," she said, as cold as she could be. Neji waited. "It's just a theory, but I've been thinking it over and, well," she took a deep breath, "I think Hinata slept with Naruto." Neji stared at her. He looked as if he had been struck dumb. He mouthed wordlessly, pale as death, before seizing his kunai from the desk and starting for the door. Tenten grabbed him. "Where are you going?" "To cut off his." "No," she cried, "listen to me." "Neji, listen, damn it." He stopped struggling and concentrated on her slim brown arms around his chest, which calmed him a little. "So how did you come to this conclusion?" "Well, you know when Hinata fell out of the carriage the night we set off." He nodded. "And remember he said he had been swimming?" Neji nodded, comprehension dawning at last. "She was gone at that time too. I would never have put 2 and 2 together, but the next day we found, that's Sakura, Ino and we found a pair of boxes. And we had them and Naruto came over and asked for them. I might not have noticed, but then Sakura made a joke about skinny dipping." Neji shuddered. "Wait, it gets worse." Then she asked if he was with anyone and he went bright red. Tenten waited for this to take effect. Neji stared at the 4 kunai clutched so tight in his hand that his knuckles turned white. Tenten saw this too and quickly continued. "But," she sighed, "I think they had a fight." She told him what Sakura had told her on the second evening and how she had worked things out after seeing them both go into the woods, and about that very night when he had been staring at her so intently. Neji looked at her then. She was watching him, waiting to see his response. "She can't just do this," he growled. "It would mean nothing if she was a normal girl, but she's not normal. She needs to be whole and perfect. I'll have to ask her." He wasn't paying attention to her, so he never saw it coming. Slap. Tenten's hand connected with his face. He stumbled back, staring at her. What was that? What was that for? She hissed. Apart from the detail that whether she does or doesn't do this is none of your business. She blinked back tears, and your cousin might be hurting right now. All you care about is whether she's a virgin, and that is for the reputation of the clan. With that she wheeled around, pausing once by the door. She spat, and even if she was normal, as you put it, it most certainly does not mean nothing, because it's important to her. And she stalked out, leaving Neji cupping his hot cheek and wondering if they had really been talking about Hinata. The next day was quiet. They were allowed to spend the time as they wished, and most of the guests chose relaxing. But Naruto couldn't relax. Every time he shut his eyes he would see her face. Pale and perfect. Instead he decided to train but kept making mistakes because he wasn't concentrating. It was the party tomorrow night. Admittedly, the next day they would all be running security checks and drilling before the actual party, but it still felt like an awfully long time to fill. In the end he went to find an Ika Paradise book that he had been given just before they left by Kakashi. It was dog-eared but legible, and Naruto settled under a tree to read it. It started off bearable enough until the main female character turned out to be a princess and had to leave to guard her country. Naruto threw it aside in disgust. Two shadows fell across him. He looked up to see Shikamaru and Chuji. Hey idiot, mind if we join you? Naruto gestured at the empty ground. Go nuts. Shikamaru made to sit down, but his foot made connection with Ika Paradise. And he flipped it over to read the cover. Mouthing the TLE, a lazy grin spread across his face. Naruto scowled at him. Kakashi gave it to me, he said angrily. Shikamaru was reading the blurb now, chuckling to himself. Well, to each his own, I suppose, he said, and tossed it back to Naruto. So man, what are you getting Hinata for her birthday? Naruto's eyes snapped open. I hadn't thought about that. Chuji snickered. Well, you better, said Shikamaru, it is tomorrow. Naruto grimaced. Well, I'm not really sure it's appropriate. We aren't really speaking. He felt sick as he uttered the words. Shikamaru stared at him. What? You and Hinata? But you don't fight. Hell, if I didn't know better I would think she lacked the gene that made her fight with anyone. We didn't argue, we just sort of fell out. Why? Naruto was silent for a second, then lay back and stared at the blue sky. Can we not talk about it, please? There was silence. He could practically see them signing to each other across him. The sun went in rather abruptly and he shivered. Bye, you two. He got up and walked away, leaving Ika Paradise on the floor behind. He got back to his room and suddenly felt the CSP Ling pain tear through his torso. Without bothering to get to bed, Naruto wrapped his arms around his middle and sank down onto the floor. He curled up there and went to sleep, where he dwelled in nightmares about a dark head moving amongst trees. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't reach her. The next day he drifted around, slightly out of it. With the party getting closer each second, he had to skirt around the decorators and cooks who were setting up lights and buffets at every corner. He hadn't slept well and now he felt ill. In the end he swallowed his pride and went to see Sakura. She was doing her hair at the time. Sakura, I feel bad, she groaned. Did you eat too much? No, I've barely eaten for 2 days. Well, that might be it, she said sarcastically, undoing a roller. Please Sakura, I feel really, really bad. His voice broke as he said it and she whirled around to look at him. Naruto felt wetness on his face and wiped his cheeks furiously. God damn it, he yelled and pressed his hands to his eyes. He tried to leave but Sakura had jumped up and grabbed his face, staring at him. Naruto, what on earth is wrong with you? You've been acting so weird these last few days. He resisted her for a second before collapsing onto her shoulder. I don't know, he med. It was like the cry of a wounded animal and Sakura felt her lungs shrink at the sound. The salty smell of tears filled her nose and she wrapped her arms around him tightly. He seemed so much like a child she didn't want to let him go. Drawing back she looked at him again. He whimpered and held on. His face was shiny with crying. Oh Naruto. She kissed his cheeks and felt tears of her own spill over. He tried to pull her back towards him but suddenly she froze and struggled from his grasp. He looked scared and betrayed but she seized him and stared into his eyes. Oh my sweet and holy God. He shook his head in confusion. What? Then to his dismay she began to laugh. She laughed until she had to lie down on the bed and pant. Sakura, what is so funny? He shouted. She sat up again. Sober. You are sick for a very good reason. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Oh, I'm so happy I could sing. I could cry. Well, I am crying. She wiped her face but to no avail. Sakura. Naruto growled. Really growled. Idiot. She sighed, and then she hugged him. Okay, sit there and tell me everything that has happened the last few days. Sakura, I don't think I can do this. Sakura was pulling him along by the hand while he tried to loosen his tie. She had to admit he did look pale, but she wasn't going to let him spend another second in his wretched misery. She hitched up the front of her dress so she could move a little quicker and scanned the crowd for Ino. The security staff, Naruto and the others, were dressed formally but not traditionally. Most of the older guests were in robes, but their children had opted out in favor of party dresses and suits. All, that is, except Hinata and Hanabi, who were in full costume. Hanabi kept fidgeting, but Hinata just stared straight ahead, greeting the guests when they approached, then not even noticing when they walked away. She did see one thing though. She saw Naruto being pulled along by a girl in a plum evening dress, looking nervous and playing with his tie. Sakura, I'm serious, I can't do this, I feel sick. Of course you can do this, fool. She snapped, you're just scared. No, I'm not. She spun around with a disgusted snort, smacked his hand away from his tie and straightened it for him. Don't lie to me, idiot, I know you better than almost anyone. You are wetting yourself. He looked at her then, closely, and felt the sudden urge to hug her. But he resisted the desire. Sakura spotted Ino, who was wearing a purple dress with a plunging N line. She was fending off two amorous guests. They had each handed her flutes of champagne and were talking constantly, neither wanting to let the other get a word in edgeways. Sakura plastered a delicate flirtatious onto her face and strolled over, still dragging Naruto with her. She took one of the glasses of champagne from her friend. Hello, Ino, she smiled, releasing Naruto and grabbing Ino's now free hand. She yanked her away. Thank you, breathed Ino, creepy little bastards. You know they were actually reciting their father's estate holdings. Sakura laughed. Oh well, they're only doing what they know. No excuse, muttered Ino and downed her champagne. If I don't hit one of these crawling, slimy little boys before the end of the evening, it'll be a freaking miracle. By the door, a girl was standing. She was wearing a red dress that just skimmed her calves. It flared out as she walked. The bodice, tight against her flat stomach and chest, was strapless, revealing her soft tanned shoulders. Her hair was in its usual buns, but the strands that had escaped had been curled and framed her tender face. After a few deep breaths she was able to walk in. She felt eyes on her and shivered in satisfaction. Catching sight of a blonde head, she veered off and found Ino, Sakura, and Naruto. Naruto was staring into space while the other two debated the advantages and disadvantages of marrying one of the rich heirs at the party. Hello, she said tentatively. Oh hello Tenten, wow, you look lovely. Sakura was right, she did look wonderful. It was a shame that the one who appreciated it the most wasn't there. Well, he was, but he certainly wasn't paying attention. Neji was stood by his aunt, the only adult who was wearing a dress worthy of a party, scarlet and knee-length, looking more like Hinata that evening than Hinata did. Neji had his eyes fixed firmly on the floor, avoiding everyone's gazes. That was until he caught a flash of red in his peripheral vision. He looked up. It was Tenten. Neji thought his heart might be expanding because it was suddenly beating very fast and his lungs felt starved of air. He didn't think she was coming. Aunt, may I? Yes Neji, you may. But I. Go Neji. She nudged him and he felt the biggest smile spread over his face. He took a step, then went back and kissed her on the cheek. She laughed but gave him a little push. He walked briskly towards her, but there was a massive clamor and the band struck up. Everyone looked towards the stage where a man was stood. Hello everyone, isn't it a wonderful night? Outside there was a roll of thunder. The crowd laughed. Apparently he doesn't agree, chuckled the man. Anyway, we're going to get started with a good song, so grab a partner and dance away. Enjoy the party. The floor suddenly became inundated with couples, and Neji was surrounded. He saw Tenten on the edge of the floor being spoken to by a young man with sticky out ears and wispy hair. A sudden plume jealously exploded inside Neji and he strode over. Tenten, do you mind if I steal you for just a second? Her companion gave him a sour look as Neji took her hand and led her onto the floor. She glared at him icily. He put one big hand on her slim waist and clasped her other in his. Reluctantly she put her hand on his other shoulder and he began to turn her around the room. He didn't speak, just gazed into her face. He stared and stared until she had to look away. She watched the band instead, trying to concentrate on the dance, but Neji was steering and he felt so unshakable she really had nothing to do but move her feet where he wanted them. He guided her around while she hung loose in his arms. Eventually she couldn't bear it anymore. What is this supposed to be? An apology? Neji looked down at her. She was glaring at his chest. He stayed silent. It isn't. She sounded even angrier. No. This is a dance. She tried to push him away in disgust but he wouldn't let her. You look lovely tonight, he whispered. She shot him another death glare. He chuckled and came to a gentle stop. Still holding onto her waist he reached into his jacket pocket. Naruto was gazing dully into space trying to wash away the evening's task with duty but nothing was going on so he had to listen to Sakura and Ino play the "If You Had to" game. Ino was laughing at Sakura who was struggling to choose between Tenten's former suitor with the huge ears and another one who though dressed formally had unwisely decided to dye his hair bright green. In the end she chose the green one because he looked like more fun. But when she turned to tell Ino this she found her friend was no longer paying attention. She was concentrating on the floor, mouth hanging open. Sakura and Naruto looked out to where she was pointing. Sakura screamed, drawing more looks to the couple in the middle. Naruto could only stare. Tenten had clasped her hands over her mouth. Only her big hazel eyes were visible. Neji stared down at her. Her eyes were fixed on his hand. The little black box on his palm was open. The diamond ring in the center sparkled at her. I feel like I could talk and talk for hours on why I'm doing this, he smiled. It's not an apology, Tenten. This is not a way to say sorry. But I'm certainly not apologizing for being in love with you anymore. He sank to one knee and held up the box. Tenten. Neji, wait. Will you marry me? There were gasps around the hall. Tenten looked around at them all and her shoulders drooped. She took the box out of his hands and looked at the ring. It was clear as water. She snapped the velvet lid shut and curled her fingers around it. No. Neji looked up shocked. You bloody fool, I never wanted you to ask me to marry you. She shook her head and her buns came slightly loose. She knew that she hadn't done them tight enough. I just wanted you to think about what we were. If you loved me, apparently you do, she smiled. You know I don't think you've said that before. Neji gaped at her. She laughed loudly and held out a hand. He took it and got up. Then she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. Her lips pressed against his, her tongue tracing the shape of his mouth. They broke apart. She had never kissed him with such honesty. She beamed at him and rested her forehead against his. So this means you're going to tell Hiashi-sama. Well, I think he already knows. Tenten turned to look at the head of the family. He was rooted to the spot staring at them. Next to him River was bobbing up and down in excitement, her dress flouncing around her. Tenten drew away and looked at the little velvet box. She held it out to him but he pushed it back, closing her hand around it. Think about it, he murmured, lacing his fingers with hers and leading her towards his family. How romantic, cooed Ino from afar. Naruto watched Neji talking to Hiashi and suddenly felt like a coward. He grabbed the champagne stem from Sakura and downed it. Wiping his mouth, he undid his tie and tore it right off. As he walked purposefully towards Hinata, he heard Sakura hiss. Naruto, no. Not now, wait until she's alone. But he ignored her. Instead he strode towards Hinata, who was stood behind her parents and sister as she watched the scene. He made as if to walk straight past her but stopped as he reached her side. She didn't notice him stood just behind her until he slipped his large hand into her palm. She jumped and looked at him. He leaned into her ear. She could feel his warm breath on her cheek and felt that old familiar blush begin to climb her neck. I need to talk to you, he whispered, squeezed her hand softly and let it go. She didn't look at him but gave the tiniest nod. As he passed by, he let his hand rest in the small of her back. It made her tremble as his hand swept across, grazing the top of her backside. She would go and see him as soon as she could. That hand and that breath had made it impossible for her to stay away. The conversation with Neji seemed to be going well. River was talking low and fast in Hiyashi's ear, arguing passionately, and appeared to winning the case. Finally he gave a curt nod and River cried out in delight, throwing her arms around his neck. He seemed to lean away for a second but then gave in and slipped his hand around her waist, holding her loosely in a one-armed embrace. She leaned on his shoulder, glowing. The floor had cleared and suddenly the band struck up again, but it wasn't the gentle flow of the music before. It was the stilted thrum and sharp lament of violins. Tango. River looked surprised but excited and grabbing Hiyashi's hand dragged him onto the floor. She turned and pressed herself against him. He looked annoyed for a second but then put his palm on her back and raised her other hand. The first step was slow. Hiyashi moved back, River forward, their feet sliding across the polished floor. Then they began to move quicker, spinning across the room, River sliding away then being pulled back into Hiyashi's arms. His hand slid down her calf, grabbed it and hitched it around his hip. River's other foot left the ground as they turned and Hinata wasn't sure but she thought she might have seen him kiss. Just for a second. But she soon forgot it and the rush of childish hope that came with it. They cut a line across the floor until the trembling music came to a wavering melancholy end. There was applause and River bowed while Hiyashi tried to lead her off the floor. One young man stood near them, stepped out onto the floor still clapping. He walked towards them as the applause ceased and the guests went back to their conversations. He was dressed traditionally and had long reddish hair. Hiyashi nodded at him and steered him over to his daughters. Hinata, this is Kaien-san. He's the son of a neighboring country's feudal lord. Hinata curtsied, wondering where Naruto had gone. Your future husband. Silence. A strange roaring filled Hinata's ears and blackness tugged at the edges of her vision. Hiyashi was still speaking. His family agreed the sooner the better, so the wedding will be in 2 weeks. Hinata began to breathe heavily. Hyperventilate. Her mother touched her arm. Sweetheart. Hinata yanked her arm away and tried to stay calm. My what? She asked between gasps. River looked at Hiyashi in horror. You didn't tell her. You knew, shrieked Hinata. River flinched. I thought you knew that it was why you were coming. I thought that was for my birthday. Hinata hunched over, wheezing. River took her arm and rubbed her back, but Hinata threw her off and made a dash for the door. As she flew by, most of the room stopped to watch, then, one by one, looked back towards the head of the room and the 3 people still stood there. One upset, one angry and one, with reddish hair and a long robe, only vaguely interested. Naruto saw her run and ran to the door. He met Sakura and Ino there. He put out a hand and looked at Sakura. I'll go, he said. She looked worried but nodded and held Ino back. Naruto ran down the corridor after Hinata, praying that this time he would be able to catch her. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.